Finally, we're back with THCB gang proper. The as has just been pointed out to me by I think it was Jeff that we're a bunch of old men. No, sorry, Kim, a bunch of old men as opposed to the women we had on last time. So who have we got to start up, and where have we been? Well, it's all my fault. I took a couple of weeks off around um, Christmas and the New Year, and then 1 week became 2 weeks, and 2 weeks became a month, and it became a few months. I did actually commit to writing and sending out my newsletter, which has been going out every couple of weeks, roughly. Not absolutely every couple of weeks, but I've been writing a lot more this year than I have in the past. But Kim has been faithfully writing every week on TCB, as has Mike McGee, and I've had a bunch of other cool contributors. Jeff has been writing a little bit more this year as well, but it's great to have everyone back. So, Kim Bellard, writer, TC contributor, curious guy. Jeff Goldsmith, doyen of America's Health Futurists and Health Futurists Inc., and Vince Kuraitis, platform analyst and consultant from the wilds of Idaho. Guys, wonderful to be back. I'm glad that we've got it together. We are going to have regular THCB gangs from now on out till the end of the year, and hopefully I won't go into such a long hiatus ever again, but we shall see. All right. Always really, really good to see all of you. And I don't really see a reason to change too much from our format. We are going to go to a couple of different things over the course of, for those of you who are listening on the podcast or watching this, we're going to go to a couple of different things. I had a special session with for five female health leaders about the election last week. I'm going to have a couple of special sessions. There'll be one about I'm going to have Jen Golsak talking about Dime and some of their new initiatives in a couple of weeks. I'm going to have a couple of book reviews. Robbie Pearl from former Kaiser Permanente CEO is going to come to talk about his AI book later on. But most of these will be the familiar gang chatting about stuff that we all remember. And there's quite a lot to chat about. We have an election coming up, and then there's been stuff in healthcare. So let's just go around. What have you been paying attention to? And why don't I start with you, Vince?
Hey, it's good to be back. I missed you guys. For this week's story, it's a little bit of background. My mom was a nurse, and I've always thought of nurses as uniquely qualified intellectually and emotionally, and just a lot of common sense. I think a lot of that comes from how I remember my mom. And so I picked up this week on a survey by McKinsey and the American Nurses Association on how nurses view AI. And the headline is it's cautiously optimistic. And I'll explain both sides. Let's start with maybe the optimistic side. The question was asked, do you want to see more AI tools? 64% said yes. I think that's a sign of optimism. And as a footnote, it's fairly consistent across ages. It's maybe drops off slightly as nurses get older. The highest group is the 30 to 39-year-olds, where they say 70% answer that they want to see more tools. 22% overall say we've got enough, and 14% say I'd like to see fewer AI tools. When asked about the concerns that they may have about AI, I think, again, they reflected common sense and my sense of conventional wisdom in healthcare today that AI is not yet ready for prime time, at least in a clinical sense. It is in perhaps administrative or borderline applications. When asked about what's the problem with AI, trust and accuracy was mentioned by 61%, and a lack of human interaction mentioned by 49%. So I thought that might be, since it's been a while since we've all gotten together, that might be a springboard for a broader discussion about what's happened in AI over the last, 5, 6, 8 months since we've been together. But I hope you've enjoyed that little snippet from the McKinsey survey. And again, great to be back.
Great to have you back, Vince. And I guess I wonder if they did the same survey with dock workers. what the answers would be, given what's going on at the moment. But there is something to be said for the whole issue of how much AI is too much and at what pace and the rest of it. Kim, you've been writing about that topic a lot. I don't know if that's what you want to bring up, but you've been writing about AI a hell of a lot in the last few months.
I have, but I wanted to talk a little bit about
Tell me something else.
premiums, oddly enough, because there's three different stories that all reminded me of how fragile this stuff is. First is that the Biden administration used a demonstration of status to give extra money to the Part D carriers so that Part D premiums would actually go down next year and help pay for some of the benefit changes that were going into place. But otherwise, premiums would have gone up a fair amount next year. So that calling all the Part D carriers a demonstration seems like a stretch, but that's one way to keep the premiums down and pour in more federal subsidies. Secondly, a lot of people may have seen this, but the extended premium subsidies that got put in under COVID are going to expire next year. And they've been remarkably successful. They've almost doubled the number of people in the marketplace from about 11 to about 20. And if they expire next year, some good portion of that extra 10 million people are going to probably lose coverage. So again, federal money is necessary to keep people in the pools. Which leads me to the third and final one, of course, J.D. Vance thinks that, had this remarkable insight that if you just put the healthy people together and put the sick people by themselves, it'd be cheaper for the healthy people. Like, who would have thought of that? So I'm a little bit worried that we're going to go back there, and people forget that, if you don't pay for the sick people are not going to have coverage. So all of these things go to the question about how much money should other people subsidize health insurance, particularly for their sick people. And it's a debate that I thought ACA had sort of quelled for a while, but the undercurrents are still floating out there about let's penalize the sick people again, and I'm hoping we're not going to see that again.
That reminded me. Charles Gabber, who many of you follow on Twitter, who on the one hand, did a whole lot on ACA signups and was following that intensely. He did a whole long tweet thread to remind us all what was going on in the 2000s in terms of underwriting, rescissions, refusal to cover, all the stuff that we remember in the individual market. And don't forget the other thing the ACA did, which was, was under attack or under threat from Trump, or at least Harris says is under threat from Trump, is the Medicaid expansion, right, which was huge and has now started to make it trickle into some of those red states as well. So, and Medicaid, Jeff told me this ages ago, look out for this, but it's really, it's about a third of Americans get their care under Medicaid as well. So, and by the way, 50% of births. So, more than half of quote unquote new America, or some new Americans. So, and speaking of somebody who was refused insurance in California because I'd had knee surgery 2 years before, and I had to buy a series of short-term policies where they asked about kidney disease but forgot to ask about knee surgery. I remember that well. And, but don't forget, we're talking 15 years ago now, and 20 years ago before those stories were really in the headlines, or at least 15 to 20 years, and that's a long time. Anyway, so yeah, we should think about that and whatever else Vance and Trump might do. But the other thing you didn't mention was that those subsidies have got to be renewed, right? If they're not renewed next year, if they're not renewed,
and as some article put out, you can't renew them at the end of next year because insurers are making their premium decisions like in June. So you need to do it like early in the year to have an impact.
Yeah, so which requires and then we have to look at the Senate, but it requires. It'll be interesting to see what happens when Marjorie Taylor Greene is our new Speaker of the House. Anyway, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean it actually was only 28% of the population that was on Medicaid, but it's still a great big number. At the peak, 93 million, it was like 28% of the U.S. population.
Okay, 28% is a third in my math, but that's because we're
round up to a third from 28%.
Yeah.
There are some states like California is probably a third, or the places that aggressively expanded pre-COVID are probably close to a third. But it's interesting. There was a piece by Paragon, which is one of the think tanks that is preparing itself for the Trump presidency, arguing. I saw it on LinkedIn that Medicaid coverage is more expensive than private insurance coverage is. And of course, you have a bunch of poor people, that probably makes all the sense in the world.
Not to mention if they split out the aged and disabled, right? That's a lot of.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it just, there's a lot of junk science that's floating around out there. And actually, I've just written a piece about the most egregious piece of it, which came from Zach Cooper at Yale and Zeb Goldberg from my alma mater, the University of Chicago, arguing that hospital consolidations kill people. Not kidding. That mergers between hospitals result
What's
in
the logic there?
that the mergers result in increases in private health insurance premiums that employers respond to by laying off workers, 1 in 140 of whom kill one themselves, either with drug overdoses or suicide.
That sounds like a bit of a stretch.
It was absolutely stunning. Oh, and went on to argue that healthcare rate increases in general killed 10,000 people over an 8-year period. I mean, I am not making this up. These guys are reputable health services researchers from distinguished institutions who were funded by Arnold Ventures. That is, you can't make this up either. A private foundation that converted from nonprofit because they didn't like the reporting requirements, run by a former Enron billionaire, multi-billionaire, former Enron gas trader named John Arnold. And he funded this study, and it was reported on at the end of June in the Wall Street Journal without any reference to his funding, about how hospital mergers result in layoffs in the communities that they served. I got funding from the Federation of American Hospitals from my old friend Chip Kahn and hired an economist to look at their model. It was garbage. It was garbage. It was what, the AI people are calling data sculpting. They basically built this spider web of correlations. They basically did a huge multi-database regression analysis that concluded that, and you know what they found? That the average hospital merger resulted in a 1.2% rate increase. That's it. That does not even cover the costs of the transaction, let alone generate any profits. And the argument in the paper was that hospital consolidation was a rent-seeking behavior by parties that were using the merger as a way of extracting economic benefits from local employers without providing any value. And I wrote a piece for Stat that will probably be out next week, and basically said, it is amazing to me that garbage like this ends up in the public domain. And it was garbage. I forgive me for emoting here, but I believe in evidence-based health policy. I think it's important to make decisions about what we do in healthcare based on facts. And stuff like this gets pumped into the public domain in reputable places like the Wall Street Journal as if it were actually real. And I know for a fact, because I was an advocate for a dozen hospitals or systems that wanted to remain independent, that it ain't rent-seeking behavior. It's institutions that are failing that would close if someone didn't merge with them. And I kind of went off the deep end on this. So you'll hopefully see it in Stat next week. But
I mean, it seems to me, Jeff, that you can go down the path, right, of what's the result of these hospital mergers and consolidation, right? You can say, were they going to go out of business? Was Geisinger going to go out of business if Kaiser didn't write the big check?
Right.
Some of them, I don't think Advocate or Atrium was going to go out of business if those two didn't merge. But you can go back and forth. It does seem to me though that you can torture the data any which way you like.
Well, that's
when you start torturing the data to say, and you can say healthcare goes up and employers drop coverage and all the rest of it, but employers also drop healthcare coverage. and lay off people for a whole bunch of reasons. So that's
Well,
one.
but
And then the
Matthew,
second
what-
thing is to directly say that goes to deaths. This is like somebody came out with a report back in the day, right? That
I was gonna say the
uninsured
implicit assumption that I'm surprised they made was having health coverage saves lives. Like there are a lot of economists that wouldn't agree to that, right?
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
that's true.
starting with Katie Baker at the University of Chicago, who studied what happened to people that got Medicaid coverage versus people that didn't,
Right, in
and
Oregon,
discovered
right.
that it had no meaningful effect on their health. Of course, if they end up in the emergency room because they were run over by a truck, and you restore them to the health that they had before, you could argue that actually did affect their health.
Well,
That
don't,
just didn't
don't,
change
don't
their
forget
health
what
status. They didn't die because the truck running over didn't kill them.
but
Now,
don't
how do you
forget
measure the effect of that on the health status of a population?
no, but don't forget what did she say? It didn't matter their health status, but people's mental health was actually much better. So you
A
could
little bit.
probably go
reduced
down the
their
path.
anxiety. It reduced their anxiety.
You could probably go down the path of saying there were fewer deaths from suicide. I mean, by this stage, you're getting, you're at the end of the limb of the tree, and you're starting to
Yeah.
saw it.
Yeah,
whether
yeah,
it's
yeah.
off.
I'm
It's
just-
like a
I mean,
Reddit video at this point.
your point about these cross-market mergers is well taken. I mean, I think they are absolutely, it isn't rent seeking. It's like if you're the CEO of a $30 billion healthcare organization, you're going to make 3 times as much as if you're the CEO of a $5 billion healthcare organization. That is true. And I think it is absolutely a factor that these C-suites see a huge jump in comp by merging. But most of the mergers that I am talking about, and I think it is the majority of the mergers that we're talking about. I mean, there were like 1,000 of them during the 10-year period or so. A huge fraction of those folks would have gone out of business if someone hadn't rescued them. There is almost inevitably an acquirer and an acquiree. And the acquiree didn't want to be acquired, but really got to the point where they weren't viable economically. And a recent example of that, I don't mean to be perseverating on this, but Augusta, the university health system in Augusta, that was told by United Health Group, we want a 12% reduction in your Medicare Advantage rates. That basically would have gutted the business, gutted them. Even if they got back to zero, it would have gutted them because it didn't recognize the increased costs of COVID. They ended up merging with Piedmont that had a 20% higher MA rate than these guys did before United came in and wanted to cut them by 12%. So I called up a friend at United and said, what were you doing? You dramatically increased your cost of MA in Augusta by forcing these guys into a merger. Do you know what the United guy said? He said, and I'm quoting directly, in 3 or 4 of our markets that will probably happen, but in the other 40, we're going to get most of what we want. That's what he said. So where's the problem?
What I'm
Is it
struck
in
by
that attitude, or is it in the behavior of people that couldn't afford to have their Medicare MA rate set back by 10% in the middle of a financial crisis? Where's the blame?
Yes. So over the years, I've seen lots of studies on hospital consolidation, and what strikes me as I listen to you, Jeff, is that they really haven't made the distinction you bring up.
Nope.
The distinction of the rescue hospital, or the hospital that needs to be rescued, versus, as the word you use, Andrew, the cross system, the 2 large systems that are doing okay merging. Right. That seems like it would be an important distinction.
Yeah, it is. But it's like, even with Geisinger had $3.5 billion in the bank before, the COVID crisis hit. And during the peak of the insanity in that, when the pandemic was still going on, but the relief funds ran out, Geisinger lost $800 million in 12 months. $800 million just disappeared. And I personally believe their board panicked. I don't think they needed to sell. But I think their board and their CEO concluded, you know what? If this goes on for another 12 months, we're screwed. And we really do need to find somebody with deeper pockets, and they ended up with Kaiser. So even with a Geisinger, Matthew, I think you could argue, losing $20 million a month as a health system is not a sustainable state of affairs.
I think, it all comes back to me the more and more I look at this, and I've been ragging on and beating up on UPMC in particular, purely because they're the ones who actually publish their 990 and tell you how much everyone makes, all the way down to the quarter of person. Whereas if you look at others like Providence and Ascension, it's very hard to pull that. Well, there are some AI tools that are starting to be able to pull that data together. It's very hard to pull together the whole thing and see across the board. But there are clearly a lot of very well paid people in these big systems.
So what?
Well, so here's my so what. I think that we've proved with COVID and with Change Healthcare that we're paying providers and we're paying hospitals on a transactional basis, on fee for service. And if you run into a problem, if systems normal, get screwed up because of patients don't show up for whatever reason, or the money that should be with the patients doesn't come with them, those businesses, aren't viable. So I think we need to find a different way of paying them that isn't connected to that, which would then take us away from that.
Paying the executives?
No, forget the executives. I think we should pay the executives less. But I think the organizations, institutions, who are now vulnerable to either Change Healthcare not paying them, United Health Group coming along and saying we're having a bad time with our stock because our star ratings went down, therefore we want you to pay you 12% less on your MA admissions or whatever. I think all of that should be taken out of the hands. I'm now at the point where there should be basically global budget payments to hospitals and salaried doctors, and that should be it. I'm now past the point of seeing any other way of making this work.
Well, lots of luck with that.
I'm not saying it's going to happen because
right.
we have Medicare and we have.
Well, then what's the point of saying it?
What's the point of you saying United shouldn't be putting people's payments down by 12%? We don't seem to be able to stop that either. We should, so.
Well, but there is a consequence, like the one that happened in Augusta, and the consequence with United is a lot of people are dropping out of their networks. They have a Swiss cheese network. They're going to lose utilization. They use their enrollment. They lose enrollment, and their earnings go down. So there actually is a natural consequence. Matthew. I mean, you got a point, which is that I think there is an argument, and you're seeing this with some of the rural hospital payment models that are coming out, that you want to have a base level of payment that comes to people regardless of the number of folks they take care of. I'm down with that. I think that's a good idea. But I think to completely eliminate, payment per utilization or payment per transaction or whatever, I think it's not going to happen. It's just unrealistic. So I'm with you on the principle that there ought to be a base level of payment. But the idea that we're going to convert all these people, that's Paul Elwood. It's just not going to happen.
If we're going to do a base level payment, though, we need to have a base level of performance.
I agree.
We get Michael Milton up here to talk about what are the guarantees, what they're going to do.
Yep.
But then we need a base level of coverage, right? A base level of behavior. So we're not.
That's where you get into the whole what happens when you have 30 million uninsured people. Absolutely. And those folks are not randomly distributed in the health system. And there is good data on this, funded by Arnold Ventures, believe it or not, that the larger the number of unfunded and publicly funded patients, the more likely it is that you fail economically. That's not rocket science, but it's pretty much been conclusively demonstrated that is a major factor in the mortality of hospitals and systems, is the larger the number of publicly funded patients, the larger the number of patients with no coverage, the less likely it is that they're going to be able to remain independent.
So two statistics that I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure one of you does. What is the percentage now of Medicare people on Medicare Advantage? Because I think it's north of 50% now, isn't it?
No,
it's about 55%.
It's about 33%.
No, two of you have a vastly different number.
No, 55.
33%.
Medicare Advantage?
No, actually, you're right. No, Kim, you're right. It's 33 million, and it is half.
It's 55.
You're dead right.
Right.
And the other one,
but it's going to go down next year, I would guess, because.
But it's still the norm. And the other one is like, so how many uninsured are there yet? We don't talk about that very much, but there's still tens of millions of people uninsured.
It's going to push back to 30 million with the redeterminations on Medicaid. It's going to be back over 30 million. So it's going to be
We've stopped
9 or
talking about some of these
10%.
things, but like we still have these issues going on. They're just under the surface to some extent.
Yep.
But I'd raise a bunch of. So I'm going to say a bunch of things that are sort of other things that have gone on. By the way, you mentioned Piedmont Hospital. It was a Piedmont in Georgia. It was a Piedmont hospital that did not treat Aubrey. I'm blanking on her name, but Amber Aubrey, the woman who needed the DNC and died.
Yeah.
Post-abortion. I had a look at that. The CEO of that hospital
How long ago was that?
It was 2 years ago. It was, but ProPublica only reported on it.
Yeah, I missed it
this week. So recently. So, that's one. So but go back to the debates, right? We're talking about in the politics. We're talking about that. We're talking about getting us back to 2022 or 2021, not really fixing the problems we've been talking about around women's health, which is why this kind of stuff is not servicing in the debate. The other thing we're talking about is more widely is pricing, right? And so you're hearing a lot about drug pricing, a lot about the price of insulin. Medicare has now successfully negotiated prices of drugs that are now only 2 or 3 times the cost they are in other countries, not 8, 10 times.
10 of them anyway.
No, or 10 of them, and maybe do some more. And of course, my favorite news article from this week. Did you notice this? Boris Johnson wrote his memoirs, and apparently I still can't get over this. In his memoirs, apparently during COVID, he found that there was a whole bunch of British-made vaccines that were in a warehouse in Holland, and he was going to have the British Navy invade Holland to steal the vaccines. So, which says to me that this is the rational play we should be doing with Ozempic. Given that Ozempic is owned and controlled by a company based in Denmark, how much fight are the Danes going to put up if they see the USF coming over the mountain, the US Navy? We should just go invade Denmark, take it, and then we could give out free Ozempic and solve the problem of the obesity crisis and the cost of Ozempic.
That sounds like a very MAGA idea.
Wasn't Trump going to invade Greenland or steal? Or...
He wanted to buy
He
Greenland.
wanted to buy it.
He wanted to invade Mexico
from Denmark and whatever.
I don't know why you want to buy Greenland, but does you get Ozempic thrown in?
It's a lot of real estate. You can build
And a
condos
lot of
on the
water.
ocean there.
A lot of water that's melting.
There's a lot of water ending up in the sea because of policies that he doesn't want to reverse. Anyway, well, I think that and we've talked a lot about over the years about hospital consolidation and management and care management and population health, all this stuff. And I saw it and I didn't keep it, and I maybe one of you saw it, but in the last few months, I think it was in an earnings report, the CEO of HCA was sort of quoted as basically saying that our business, and go back to people who don't put their hospitals in places where you have too many uninsured or underinsured or publicly managed people who very, very carefully pick where they're going to go and have very high profit margins as a consequence, and run their business like real, hardcore businesses. He said, essentially, our business hasn't changed much in the last 20 years. We're still doing more or less what we're doing, which, and we've talked, endlessly about this on THCBGang and elsewhere. But as you said, Jeff, we've been talked about value-based care and all this great stuff, and it's been a bonanza for consultants and on the speaking circuit, but hasn't really happened much in real life. It's still a fee-for-service, transaction-led business, and if you manage to figure out how to mind that business well, and HCA has done it better than most, you end up with what we end up with. So.
Well, but there's also really good data that HCA and its colleagues in the investor-owned world, when they do own a significant fraction of a market, render more uncompensated care than their not-for-profit competitors do. And that has been, repeatedly affirmed by research over multiple years. So your argument that they're running like a business and they don't give a shit about poor people is garbage.
Well, I'm not saying that, but they certainly, they're extracting margins that are, 2 to 3 times the amount off their business. I'm not saying, by doing it 4 times, their margins as a whole are much better than non-profits. Now,
why do you think that is?
Well, because the non-profits are hiding the money somewhere else.
I think it's more damning about not-for-profits than it is
I know
bailing
a lot
out
about
profits.
I know a lot about HCA. And one of the important things about HCA is they don't call the people that run their hospitals CEOs. They're administrators, and they don't have 7 layers of bureaucrats between their CEO and the patient. They run lean. They don't chase rabbits. They don't start health plans. They don't buy up local businesses, under the nonprofit umbrella. They don't do any of that crap. So the idea that their margins come from rent seeking, which is the implication that you're making, is not accurate.
Oh, no, I'm saying they're not hiding the money. We're saying the same thing. The not-for-profits are hiding the money by doing all those other things you just talked about in general, right?
They're not wasting the money.
Agree.
Okay, that's different.
All right. Don't.
So we're in a different place.
Yeah.
And I say that as somebody that is, as I've worked for both the investor-owned and nonprofit systems. I know their numbers. Okay. I also know the people that run them because they're my colleagues, and I think, there's no simple narrative here, Matthew, that adequately encompasses the amount of sheer waste in our health system. I mean, it is just staggering how much money we waste.
So don't worry, we're going to fix that with AI. Let's move to that topic.
No doubt about it.
Okay, Vince, let's go back to you raised the point earlier on about the AI and the nurses. I kind of was kidding about dot workers, but I'm also not kidding. I'm sure you will probably all seen the video of what a dot work in this new Shanghai port with the completely automated cranes and everything else is going on, compared to what happens in a dock in the US, and those dot workers have gone out. Now, you can make great arguments that the union's been underpaid, hasn't shared in the profits of the docks, etc., etc. Go backwards and forwards, but any technology at some point you could say was going to put somebody out of a job, and we haven't really figured out how to manage that transition. I don't see why this is in any particular different. Same thing happened, with the coal miners in Britain in the 80s, and obviously the Hollywood actors somehow over the last year somehow managed to delay AI writing their scripts. But again, if you look at what's going on in the wider world of AI this week, OpenAI managed to get $6 billion in funding from a bunch of different players. But if you look at what's coming out of sort of Gemini and OpenAI and Anthropic and others, it's really getting very good about certain things. So I'm wondering, go back to Vincent, you've been writing about this a lot, Kim. What do you think what's the sensible, rational approach that for the nurses who want the 69% who want it? How do we avoid the dot worker or the Screen Actors Guild thing where you say we're just not going to have this for 2 years, because at some point you can't keep your finger in that dike?
Well, two things first. I'm going to go to the dock workers because it sort of interests me. So the Wall Street Journal had an article this morning. The average salary for a dock worker on the West Coast is how much do you guys think?
$100,000.
250.
250.
250. On the East Coast, it's like 150. So these are not the guy from on the waterfront. And the second thing is, when container ships came along 40 years ago, this was inevitable, that it's going to get automated to death. So they're fighting a valued fight, but it's a losing fight. It's just like long-haul truck drivers. In our lifetimes, there's not going to be long-haul truck drivers. It's going to be automated. So our job is to figure out, what do we do with these people? As for nurses, I'm sorry, there are going to be people that touch patients, human beings that touch patients. And I think there's going to be nurses. You may not have medical assistants and people drawing blood, that kind of stuff, but there are going to be nurses. I got to figure out what that role is and what the uniquely human thing of that is.
Well, I would add to what Kim just said, the reality that there's going to be a staggering, crippling shortage of frontline caregivers of all stripes in our health system over the next 10 years as those workaholic baby boomers retire and replaced by people that want to work 0.6x
from home.
People retiring did. There are just not going to be enough bodies. And forget about the fact that we're wasting a huge percentage of clinical time by diverting it into documentation to feed the AI machines of the United Health Groups and Humanas of the world. So, the argument that AI is going to put a bunch of people out of business. My God, we don't have anywhere near enough clinical person power to meet the needs of our generation as they begin falling apart in earnest, which is happening right now. So
I'm
we
always,
need
I'm,
AI.
I'm always struck when
would
when I
be-
go to healthcare.
Vince is trying to get in. So
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. I think it'd be interesting to compare notes on what I've seen as one of the probably the closest thing to a killer app in AI in healthcare, and that's around. It has different names, ambient listening, but the idea of the AI listening during the doctor-patient visit and then providing a draft summary for the clinician. And my narrative of what's happened over here, there were dozens of companies doing this over the last, I think, decade that they've been working on it. And what I'm seeing is it's very rapidly becoming commoditized.
sure.
And Epic's got this. It's becoming really more of a feature of the EHR as opposed to really being a separate company. And 90% plus of these companies are probably going to go away. So, the question I'll pose is that, is that the canary in the coal mine for what happens for other AI applications? They just become absorbed by other platforms, by EHRs or the radiology platform, and it's just going to be very, very difficult. I'm not an investor in OpenAI, and I think for that reason I probably wouldn't be.
Well, a point to that. So I think not having the doctors spend time writing up their notes is a great idea. It's a waste of time. What I don't think question is that what's the point? Why are we doing these notes? Do patients read them? Do they have value? We're not reevaluating what we're doing. We're just trying to make AI make it easier. And one of my worries about AI is it's going to enable all the dumb stuff we do, and the AI can do it quicker. But instead of just saying, let's not do so much dumb stuff.
Yeah, I think
That's an
Shakespeare probably
extremely important
answered
point.
that when he said, "Let's kill all the lawyers." That's. But you're asking a good question, Kim. Why are we doing this? Maybe that's a more fundamental question, but I think it still leaves open my point about, AI headed down the road of commoditization.
Well, what that says is that a lot of the people that are investing in this right now at the peak of the mania are just going to lose their butts. Just like the folks that invested in digital health at the peak of the mania are in the process of losing their butts. I don't think ambient listening is the killer app. I think the killer app, and I invested in it, is AI that can read the record and actually figure out what's going on with the patient and integrate all of that ambient listening stuff into the diagnostic note and into the plan of care.
So let me ask you about that, because my question for that, because I agree with you, right? I think that the AI will read the record. I mean, right now we're still in a fight, and we haven't mentioned the stuff that's happened while we've been gone, including this new lawsuit between Particle and Epic over getting access to the data. Right now we're in a fight about getting access to the data. We're still in fighting about integrating the data, but we've got much closer to the capability of integrating the data, which is why we're now fighting about it. 5 years ago, you couldn't do it, so no one cared. And now we're fighting about who has rights and access to it, and does Epic do it, and does Epic do it with a bridge or nuance, or is it, it's Microsoft or with somebody else or whatever. But here's my question: you both said, Kim and Jeff, with having too much effort writing down too much stuff, and that and I have been there with you. My wife about 6-7 years ago cut a finger slicing an orange or something. We went to an urgent care, and while she's there with the thing hurting like hell and like the bone exposed, I could see the med assistant is like going down the list of all the things that I know were in the high tech law, the 25 things they'd ask. Like she was asking about a smoking status, like whether she exercised and whether she was depressed. And saying, don't ask all this damn stuff. It's like you need to have fingers stitched up. You can ask about that later. But she had to do all that stuff into the record first because it was there. But I don't know if the AI, do we require all of that stuff in order to make sense of it? Were we getting it? Was there not enough captured before for the AI to make the level of diagnostic and sort of plan sense that you're talking about? Because I've also seen, you're also now seeing a bunch of companies who are trying to figure out, how do I extend the doctor through essentially AI, so that the initial history and the physical, all that stuff about, are you smoking, and are you, how do you do today, Mrs. Jones? So some of that requires, as Mike McGee's not here would say, the laying on of the hands, and worrying about, preventing the saging you about fear and worry. But a lot of that can be done by technology, and it is being done. There are companies like Health Note and others doing that. So I think, using tools to capture stuff and take out the busy work from medical assistants and doctors is great. I don't know if we need to be capturing as much stuff as we capture it in order to make the AI powerful. That's an open question.
Matthew, it's a super important point. And I wrote a piece this summer or this spring for the Hospital Financial Management Journal that argued that pruning back the thicket of absurd duplicative documentation requirements that are basically being used to feed the AIs that are running these health plans now is the fundamental challenge. Is that we are asking clinicians to document every single decision they are making in triplicate because we don't trust their judgment. And, that's the real toxic critter in this mix, is that toxic lack of trust in clinical decision-making and the assumption that policymakers have made. And we've seen it over and over again that, of course, clinicians are just going to run up the tab. They're going to do stuff that's unnecessary because that's how they make money. And that's been the dominant narrative of our health policy for the last 50 years, since more than 50 years, since, Kenneth Arrow's famous essay on moral hazard. That's the real problem. And the idea, do we subject a Geisinger or a Kaiser or whatever it is to the same absurd micro accountability for everything they do that generates the demand for that data in the first place? That to me is the fundamental problem.
It's a
Kim, and then I have something to say about this as well. Kim?
It's a constant pet peeve of mine. So the reason that we make doctors and hospitals jump through all these hoops is because, okay, maybe there's 5% of doctors that are incompetent. Maybe there's 5% of doctors that, are avaricious, that are charging too much. But we can't quite pin down who those people are. So we make everybody jump through all these hoops, and we still don't catch that 10%. Mm-hmm. If we could focus on getting the bad doctors out, getting the greedy doctors to not be so greedy, we wouldn't have to make life so hard for everybody else. And the sad thing is, people in the hospitals know who those guys are, and yet we can't communicate that to get any action on that.
So I saw a case, DOJ case, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, which I tweeted out. I thought was quite remarkable, in which there was a doctor who was ordering excessive drug urine tests under Medicare, and he was ordering $3 million worth a year, collecting 1.5. So I don't know how some of it didn't get through. 12 years before they found him.
Well, okay.
That's one problem. My view, Jeff, is the way you fix this is you don't pay people by transactions. I know you say you shouldn't do it, but that's what if you don't pay people by transactions, I go back to when my dad was, in the NHS. Basically, they got a budget and the doctors did what they liked and ran the hospital, and you trusted their professional judgment. And that to me wasn't a bad way of doing it.
Well, but the other way to do it is to use AI to find the guy that's overbilling by $3 million.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
But here's my problem. It's the system. Do you remember about 3-4 years ago, there was a case where I think it was a complete fraudster set himself up with a MPI number as a doctor, allegedly was doing, some kind of physical therapy stuff, but was just making stuff up. And his ex-wife and the ex-father-in-law basically found him doing this. It was mostly to commercial health plans. And they basically took the case to all the big commercial health plans and said, do you realize you're paying this guy? He's completely fraudulent. There are no patients. He hasn't qualified to get in whatever the medical specialty was. He doesn't have this. 5 years of them bringing a slam dunk case to them. Nobody seemed to care, do nothing about it. I'll have to pick that one. I'll have to go find that one. But that happens all the time.
You're seeing the leading edge of this in this discussion of gold carding. which is the idea of giving people an easy
Right.
pass who 5 years worth of documentation is suggested are practicing conservative, thoughtful medicine. And you
Right.
don't subject them to all this garbage. And you know, the joke about this, and I was just reading about this sometime today about United's Gold Card initiative is, yeah, but you got to be in network. And you got to pay to be in network by giving up 20% or 30% of your fees. So if those are the games that are being played to get people to the point where they don't have to be documenting for an hour for each hour they spend on patients, that's not a good trade for the society or for the clinicians themselves. So, I mean, I'm not, Matthew, I have been a big advocate of delegated risk, of the idea that you have a certain number of patients that your health system is taking care of. Insurers ought to write them a check per month or per year or whatever it is and get the hell out of their way. But you know, what's happening now is under the guise of value-based care, we're insisting that they document 500, you know, what are they called? Critical variables. There's a term for this that I'm blocking on, Kim. What is it?
KPIs.
Yeah, no, not KPIs. It's like it's a measure of value-based care, you know, that if you do it, you're a good person.
Yeah.
I can't remember what they're called, but there's a term for them that I'm blocking on. Alzheimer's is a terrible thing.
I've written a few times that, so I hate networks. I think networks are a very primitive tool. And I would argue that if insurers would focus on getting the patients to the right doctor at the right time to get the right care, it'd be cheaper for everybody.
Yep.
And people wouldn't hate insurers.
Right.
But instead, they have this very convoluted, they rely on networks, predetermination, fee schedules, and all this kind of stuff that everybody hates, including the insurers. They should focus on, you know, if you do it right the first time, it's going to be cheaper and
Right.
better.
I'm with you. And I guess it's just, I think there is a cultural value inside these insurers that basically said, don't trust anybody. And the way we make our money and our legitimacy as a social institution is being hyper vigilant about every single thing every one of those crooks does.
Well, but
I think,
it's not,
and
it's
I
not
don't
just
think
the
it's going
insurers.
to change.
None of the doctors or hospitals are going to want to admit, no, we're not the right place for that kind of thing. So-and-so's better. Nobody wants to admit they're not the best at everything.
Okay.
And that's just
So,
stupid.
Okay. But it's that pervasive attitude of mistrust that I think
On
is
both sides.
at the root of all this stuff. And look, I mean, I'm with you. I've met doctors for whom no gallbladder is safe. Okay. I met an orthopedic surgeon who had a helicopter pad on the roof of his office building. I mean, those folks exist. There's absolutely no question. But for that to be the paradigm of how we think about clinicians, that their professional values and the values of their institution mean nothing, I think is just, we've paid a huge price for it. And the price we're paying now is we're burning out tens of thousands of clinicians providing all this garbage. And we're going to have 6-month waiting lists to see a specialist. And that's what's happening now. A friend of mine here in Charlottesville that is having trouble managing his hemoglobin A1C score when his primary care physician tried to refer him to an endocrinologist in town, a 6-month wait, 6 months. That's going to be all over the country, and people are going to be looking for, who do we blame for this? This is horrible. How did we let this happen? Well, we've been doing it to ourselves for 50 years, and now the bill is coming due. And Matthew, you know, I'm with you. I mean, I think it would be way simpler to not have all these transactions, but I just don't think we're going to get there, and I don't think it's necessary.
I couldn't agree with you more, because if there was a time when the heads of all these institutions would have said, and you know, the doctors would all come out and said, why are we paying ourselves this way? It was under COVID. And what do they want to do? They wanted to go straight back to India. Can we go back to as much patient volume as we can?
Matthew, for 50 years, we've been trying to Kaiserize our entire health system, and we have failed.
Yeah,
We've been trying to convert them all to Kaiser, and we're going to have capitation the day after tomorrow, and we have failed. That is because these institutions and professionals were not built to manage population risk. And I don't care how many consultants you hire or how many fancy venture capital based, value-based care enablers we fund, we're not going to freaking get there. It's not going to happen.
The irony, I'm agreeing with so much of what you guys are saying, but the label I got to put on this conversation is it's sort of like the mice saying, we got to go bell the cat. There's really no political will in our country to change the fundamentals of the system.
Fair enough.
And
I mean, I that's what I'm saying about the debate, right? What are the healthcare aspects you've heard about? I mean, so at least back in 2008, there was a whole thing about we're going to automate the system, or we're going to bring in, Obama's going to bring in, the affordable, the equivalent. We're going to fix universal coverage. We're going to do all this stuff. There's all this work done. There is still stuff coming out of CMS, right? There's a new payment scheme for advanced primary care and what have you. But in terms of this rising to the top, we're kind of hearing a little bit about, well, JD Vance wants to roll back the ACA, and
I listened to the vice presidential debate, and
you're a brave man. You sat through all of that. Well done.
The healthcare part was really enlightening. Listening to Vance talk about all the wonderful things Trump did, and I was reminded of the first thing I heard about Trump in healthcare. It was like, I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty accurate. It's like, who knew healthcare was so complicated?
I'm not sure to paraphrase.
That was after he got his ass kicked trying to shut down the Affordable Care Act. I've got a piece that I'm working on right now, editing right now, about what a complete waste of political capital is to try and reform the healthcare system. You think about, Clinton tried to do it and lost control of Congress. He failed and lost control of Congress. Obama succeeded in passing the Affordable Care Act and lost control of Congress. So what does this tell you? Even if you succeed, the political costs of the success are so great in our interest group oriented political system that it ain't freaking worth it.
I agree, which is why they're talking about drug costs and abortion. And
right.
Why would you talk about anything else? And drug costs are part of a bigger deal because the Democrats have been tarred as the party of inflation, which.
But Matthew, and I don't mean to get personal here, but look at what's happening in your native Britain right now. A 1940s health system is basically driven off the road into the pond and is sinking. And people, there's 8 million people on waiting lists? And in Northern Ireland, it's like 3 years wait to get a hip replacement.
But that's how much money you want to spend, right?
Oh, well, of course it is, but it's also a function of the political system incapable of raising the money to spend it. Well, and, all this garbage about, we've got a right to health care. Well, that right is completely meaningless if the political system is incapable of investing the money to make it real. So, we've got a political system that can't even pass a freaking federal budget. How are they going to manage a $5 trillion, immensely powerful health system with $300 billion actors in it, like CVS and United? That is not a fair fight.
A couple of years ago, I wrote a piece that I think explains all this. You guys know what the Eisenhower principle is?
Mm-mm.
Eisenhower said, whenever I have a problem I can't solve, I make it bigger. And that way I can see a solution. So this is what healthcare has been doing the last 50 years. We haven't seen a solution, so we keep making the problem bigger. And eventually it's going to get big enough that we have to have a solution. That's what's going on.
Really?
When healthcare is 90% of the economy, then we'll do.
But the irony, Vince, is it stalled out at 18. It didn't continue growing. And why is that? I think it's because the critter ran out of Petri dish. It ran out of nutrients.
We'll have to see if we have a good.
I hope you're right, Jeff.
Because Jeff,
go look at that.
No. It's going to be 20%.
Jeff has said right. It's 17.5% basically since 2010.
Correct.
Apart from the 1 year when the economy went into recession and the unemployment rate went up and the uninsured rate went up, which was the COVID year. But that was so quick. And there was such a massive bill passed to essentially manage the recession and it's now back down at 17. The question I want to know is, well, when's the next recession? But when we go into a more standard recession, when we something that looks like 1991 to 93 or the early 80s, rather than looks like, a massive the 2008 one. What does that do? Does it stay at that, or does it grow again?
I've written about this, and the pattern is we're going to have a whole bunch of mega states that are going to take 5-8 million people off of Medicaid. They're just going to dump them. And what was her name? Sarah Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas, when she was celebrating the 400,000 people that she removed from Medicaid. Do you know what she said? We have liberated them from dependency. That's what she said. Okay. So they're going to be 10 million people liberated from dependency in Texas and Florida and Arizona and all these places where MAGA reigns. But then the other thing that's
I thought DeSantis was happy. They were happy when they were slaves.
Absolutely. So, but then the second thing that's going to happen is a lot of employers are just going to say, sorry, I can't afford the health benefit anymore. Go in and enroll in the exchanges, and we'll cut you a $50 a month check to pay for our share of the difference. So I think I don't assume that health spending simply continues blithely onward in this next recession. I think there's tremendous event risk for the health system in that recession. Vince, I see you nodding. I'm not sure whether you agree with that or not.
You're right in the statistics that it's been pretty steady, Jeff. I guess I continue to have faith in our health system. I think the number is going to continue to grow. But CBO said it's going to be 20% by 2030.
Well,
your view is kind of I hope you're right, Jeff. I hope you're right.
Vince, it tripled from 1965 to 1980. So it's not like in our lifetimes there hasn't been
the reference point we got to look at, though, is we are double what other developed countries are in terms of GDP and healthcare.
Wow, we're 50% more. Most people around about.
We're 9.6%.
Per capita.
I will cite you the statistics on it.
Okay.
Vince is
other
right.
countries that are rich like us, well, Germany,
right,
Switzerland, Norway, they're between
of developed countries.
There are the Asian countries. Somehow Japan gets over 5. I don't know how they do it.
But what Matthew is getting ready to say is right. There is a very high positive correlation between the wealth of a country and how much it spends on healthcare. At the margin,
sure,
you have the money and you put it into healthcare. And of course, there are glaring contra examples of that, like China has kept its number at like 4% because it's a frickin' dictatorship. And the private sector in China does not exist. Our problem, Vince, I think is, United, what was it? Citizens United? United Health Group is a citizen, according to United, right. where the bribing a politician is considered protected speech under the First Amendment. There is an inherent bias in our political system in the direction of rewarding powerful actors with more money.
No
disagreement there, Jeff.
No question. All right, gents, we are almost at time. I want to go around quickly and have you tell me what is going to be the. We've had the debates. I assume Trump is apparently never going to appear again, other than one of his weird rallies. But we have a month to go. I don't know if this group will get back together. But I think what we heard was that we have a lot of issues going to come, especially if the Republican win in the Electoral College, and or the Senate, which was 51-49, but we know they're going to lose. That West Virginia is going to go over. There's a weird race going on in is it Oklahoma or is it Nebraska?
Montana.
What is that? Where's the independent?
Oh, that's Nebraska.
That's Nebraska, and then Montana's close. There's a whole bunch of very close races.
Well, and then you got Cruz and Scott who are hanging on by their fingernails. So it's not.
I would be delighted if those two lose, but I don't think it's very likely. But okay, here's my question to three of you to go. Your guess for 4.5 weeks out, really big changes coming or not? And then we'll go. Kim?
On healthcare or other things?
No, I mean in the politics of the nation. And I'm not talking about any
If Trump
vote.
is elected, yes, there will be very
Could
big
you be-
changes. If
Okay.
Harris is elected, maybe she can make some incremental changes. Depends on the Congress.
All right. Is Trump going to win?
I like to believe that our country will not do that, but I'm terrified about how close it is.
Yep.
Jeff?
Ditto.
Ditto?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a piece for you
Yeah,
for
yeah.
the blog, Matthew, where I basically said, not only is Trump going to cut the hell out of Medicaid, but he's going to completely renovate all of the health agencies in the federal government and put his own shock troops in there. So I think
RFK Jr. is health.
I think people have grossly underestimated the degree of non-incremental change that could happen if Trump is elected. And, all the stuff that Vance was talking about, let's cut up, let's balkanize the rate. I mean, these guys don't give a crap. They don't care.
Vince, give final word on this. How's it looking in Idaho?
Looking to the future, I've been checking my inbox hourly to see what Trump's concept of a health plan looks like. I will
Lots
continue
of
to
luck
do
with
so.
that.
But I don't disagree with your analysis of the enormity of change, not just in healthcare, but through our society if Trump's elected.
So I will bring this back to private equity. As you know, I'm a Chelsea fan in the UK. We used to be owned by a Russian oligarch who apparently looks like me, according to got forcibly sold, who was forcibly divested of it by the British government after the Ukraine invasion, was sold to a private equity group, Clear Lake Capital, who then had a fight with the other guy, who's the Todd Bowley, who owns the LA Dodgers, and they've been fighting for 2 years about what to do it. Outsiders have been trying to figure out, we've spent $1 gazillion on new players. Outsiders have been trying to figure out what actually was done. And the NBC has a fan fest for those of you who are Premier League fans. And they had a big party in Chicago. And there was a Chelsea fan holding up a sign that said, "Chelsea, we have the concepts of a plan." I
love it.
I thought that was very good.
That's very
All right.
fun.
With that, we're gonna wrap this fun and exciting episode of THCB Gang. I want to thank my friends and colleagues who are on: Kim Bellard from Cincinnati, Jeff Goldsmith from the beautiful climes of Charlottesville, Virginia, Vince Kuraitis from his bunker in the wilds of Idaho. I'll be back next week with another THCB Gang. Look out for that on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple iTunes podcasts. And we'll see you all then. But for now, this is Matthew Holt signing off and saying thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and we will see you soon next time.